Welcome to the Cambridge Festival. My name is Paul Fletcher. I'm a consultant psychiatrist in Cambridge and Professor of Health Neuroscience at the University of Cambridge. I'm particularly interested in research into mental illness of various types.
Hi, my name is Tameem Antoniades. I'm the co-founder and chief creative ninja at Ninja Theory. We're a Cambridge-based studio. We've been founded since 2000. And our speciality is really to work on action-adventure, single-player games that are often very cinematic and story-driven for PlayStation, Xbox, PC, and VR. I want to talk in particular about the last game we released, which is called Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. A very different game for us. It's a dark fantasy game about a Celtic warrior who's fighting Norsemen or Vikings. That premise is really a vehicle for what the game is really about, which is a character who's suffering from severe psychosis and trauma, and an experience where you play the game through her eyes. And really the idea for it came from someone I knew, a friend who had a psychotic episode and described how they were hearing voices and they had these strange delusions. And I really wanted to know more, like what that experience was about and what it felt like. And it felt like the mind is far more fantastical than we give credit to. And so delved deep into that subject and based the whole game around that. So to tell you what psychosis is, I'll pass you on to Paul.
Yeah, so Tameem and Ninja Theory made contact with me because the topic of their game was something that they really felt was worthy of further scrutiny, further thinking about, further discussion. And I was only too pleased to talk to them about my background research, which is primarily into psychosis. And essentially, it's as Tameem described, it's a loss of contact with reality. As these two old video clips show, a person can seem to construct a reality within their own mind, which they immerse themselves in and which they inhabit. It's often a very frightening and bizarre reality. And we can describe it in terms of visions and voices and delusional beliefs, but the question emerges about what it actually feels like to the person who suffers from it. And a consequence of our initial discussion was that we engaged in a very, in my view, innovative and personally very fulfilling collaboration over 3 years. And it involved a whole range of people, me from the University of Cambridge, Ninja Theory, of course, but also people with their own lived experience of psychosis. So we had frequent meetings with members of the Recovery College East, which is a setup for people with experience of mental illness. And they shared their stories, shared their experiences, helped to work on the game. And this was also backed up by the Wellcome Trust and other psychiatrists and researchers. So it was a real collaborative enterprise. It was a very open collaboration and one that produced an enormous number of interesting reflections on psychosis. So in the end, this was a collaboration involving multiple different people, all with different levels of expertise and different interests and different experiences.
I can't see. Who's there?
To make a game about a warrior with psychotic mental illness as its central theme was fraught with danger. It was clear that we needed help if we were to stand a chance of tackling this subject.
For me, it was really exciting to see something that I explore scientifically being represented so beautifully in a character who's trying to penetrate the mysteries of the environment in which they've been placed with all of this strange uncertainty and noise and conflicting information that they're getting. I'm very excited by this way of trying to represent mental illness because I think it actually might be offering us insights that we wouldn't get from pure scientific explorations and actually giving us quite an empathic view of what it might be like.
What started out as a brief consultation convinced me that we were only scratching the surface of an immensely deep and interesting subject that could enrich and change the very nature of the game.
The students that are involved in this project are incredibly excited about being involved. They have described the experience as being important because it values their lived experience and shows that despite what we have been through, all of that experience becomes valid. It's something that we should all be talking about.
Maybe you're already dead. Who are you?
The people we spoke to, the stories they told were fascinating, harrowing and mind-boggling. The reality of what people experienced was vivid, far exceeding what I could possibly have imagined.
It was just fantastic to get the opportunity to use our lived experience in a very creative way. There's nothing tokenistic about the work we've put in. It feels like we've been listened to, things have been taken on board, and I think there was a lot of realism in the game itself, and it feels very authentic.
I really hope that others will follow the lead they've set and use the power of something like a video game to change people's perceptions, to increase understanding, and ultimately to make some of the stigma around voice hearing and other experiences go away.
So the stage was set for a new adventure, a fantasy that was created by Senua's own mind and one that we would experience through her eyes.
So to tackle this, representation, we broke it down into several different areas. The most obvious is voice hearing. So in that case, we used a binaural microphone, which is also used in ASMR. And with a binaural microphone, when you record actors, you can place voices in 3D space around the head. And through an iterative process, we interviewed people with lived experience on what they hear, how they hear it, the quality of the voices, and iterated with them until we got something that was close to their experience. And we did the same with visions. All of your senses under psychosis can warp and change in strange ways. So our artists worked with people and the descriptions of what their experiences are and iterated with them, alongside them, until we had something close to what they were describing. But it's easy to get caught up in the obvious symptoms of psychosis, but there are much deeper traits like delusions, which is about believing things for which there's no evidence of. And that could be persecutory, for example. But there's another side to this condition which is often missed, which the people with lived experience really wanted to impart on us. And that's the stigma and isolation of having this condition and how others treat you and how that affects your life in a negative or sometimes in a positive way. So the game would have to represent all sides of these experiences. But just to show you a few examples, I'll start with the voice hearing. This is the result of our iteration. This is what voice hearers described as one of the best representations of voice hearing they've heard.
Stay quiet. Watch. Mistake. This is a mistake. They're watching. They know you're here. You did this. You did this. Your fault. You did this. You did this.
And next, I'd like to show you a scene from the game which combines a lot of these different aspects, voices, visions, flashbacks, and a bit of a story.
And just to add to that, one of the very striking things is that it can be too easy to consider these symptoms in isolation, but it's crucially important to remember that this is a whole person experiencing these things. And one of the one of the key principles that that Ninja Theory adhered to was that this was not just about a disparate set of symptoms, but rather of a person experiencing that within their own narrative. And I think this captures that nicely.
What's your name?
Senua.
I haven't seen you before.
I don't leave home much.
Oh, Zeno's daughter.
I have to go.
Wait. Who taught you to fight like that?
No one.
No one?
Well, I watched you, and...
You learned all of that from watching me? You should become a warrior, you know.
Me?
I'm Diddy. I'm here for the warrior trials. Just come and watch. And bring your sword.
You can't put it into words. That moment, when you look into the eyes of the one who is supposed to reassure you, make you feel safe. It only takes an instant. Fear swallows you before you have a chance to make sense of it. And darkness becomes a part of who you are. You killed him. But her world changed the day the Northmen took him from her. Senua knows that there's no going back to how things were. That there's nothing to go back to at all. Stay still, stay quiet, hide, don't tell her.
Their gods can see into your mind. They will use this power to destroy you.
They won't stop me. I can still feel it.
Whatever's left of him, they will never let him go.
I'm not gonna let him rot here.
You're the one rotting here.
Leave me alone.
You will die here.
No.
And all your suffering will have been for nothing.
Shut up!
When you're playing the game, you have no option but to live through Senua's eyes and her belief systems. You have to accept her reality. When the game is a very strange game in a sense, in the sense that it's not really fun to play, but yet it was a surprise hit for us. It did enormously well, critically and commercially. We were nominated for 9 BAFTA awards and won 5, and numerous other awards, which was amazing, and the reviews were incredible. I think there was a real appreciation for how different the game was and what it was trying to achieve. It was outstanding. It hit #1 across the charts across the US and Europe. We had to sell, I think we had to sell 300,000 to break even, and it's now upwards of 4 million. So very surprising reception for us. But what's also interesting is the mental health response, which we'll see next.
Yeah, and just to add to Tameem's point, I remember very early on, Tameem, you saying to me that you hoped to break even, but possibly wouldn't, because it was really going to be something of a niche game. So it was very vicariously rewarding for me to see just how well you did through it, through doing something that was a labor of love rather than an attempt to make money. And the really nice thing was that it was received not just in the critical and gaming world very well, but it was received in the scientific and clinical world extremely well. This is an image of one of my proudest moments, which is going along to the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which is the bastion of British psychiatry, with the members of Recovery College and with Tameem and Don Matthews from Ninja Theory, and receiving their award for communication, public communication of mental health. And in addition to that, and beyond the reward, something really exciting started to happen. Messages started pouring into Ninja Theory, and also I was receiving email messages from people who either knew individuals who'd had lived experience, or who had family members, or who themselves had had experience of psychosis. And the message that was coming to us over and over again was just how important and validating it was to be able to represent an experience in a way that they could show to others. So they could tell a brother or a sister, look, if you want to understand what it's like to have voices, I want you to play this game. And their loved ones could do this, and were often very, very deeply moved by what they'd experienced. And it keeps happening. I still receive messages. I come across people who played the game. I've seen an enormous and very mature debate and conversation on the internet. And for me, it's the genuine impact that scientists want to have, communicating something to people who wouldn't otherwise be interested in, or who wouldn't otherwise be able to understand it in this way. And I don't think it would have been possible without the talents and determination of Ninja Theory, along with the members of the Recovery College. I was fortunate enough, as this collaboration went on, to have numerous conversations with Tameem, and through conversations when we were going to various conferences, and as you see here, the British Science Festival, where we discussed our work with Dame Uta Frith, we began to play with the idea of whether it was possible to go beyond using video games to represent mental illness, and start to think about whether video games could be something more, something perhaps that served as an intervention to help people with mental illness. And this gave rise to a series of, for me, very, very interesting and inspiring conversations. And what that led to was what's become known as the Insight Project.
Yeah, so it felt like we had such a great team of collaborators, and Paul in particular, that it felt a shame to let go of everyone, after that game was released. It felt like there's a real opportunity to do something interesting. So this has now become the Insight Project. So just to give you a summation of what this is about, the principle behind it is that if we could almost acquire extra senses so that we could see our mental states, the idea is that we would be able to take control and find strategies that can improve our mental well-being. So that principle turned into the Insight Project. So here's a little summary video of what it's about.
The Insight Project is a rare example of artists, scientists, and mental health experts coming together to tackle one of the most pressing challenges of our time, mental suffering.
We're asking a question. Could we combine the best of game design and technology with cutting-edge clinical neuroscience and psychiatry to help with mental suffering and to promote mental well-being? This became the Insight Project. We recognise that there's a powerful and widespread movement in science and psychiatry based on acknowledging that the brain and the body are truly intimately related and must be considered as a functioning unit. But game technology gives us a missing piece. It gives us control of the person's environment. This is enormously powerful.
But why do we think games could help? Well, over the last decade, the games industry has been in an arms race, developing real-time technologies such as virtual avatars, natural human-computer interfaces, data analytic tools, online technologies that are at levels of sophistication that are grossly underestimated by the wider world. And all of these tools were created to engage a captive mass audience, train them in new skills, and promote mastery of games. And this is a toolset that we think could equally be applied to mental well-being.
What Hellblade had achieved was to make the invisible visible. What if we could go further and give people the ability to see, engage with, and perhaps even overcome their fears and anxieties?
Over the next few months and years, we will be sharing our approach, publishing our findings, and growing our team. The project will grow in complexity as we tackle harder and harder problems for which solutions may not yet exist. However, we do believe that by focusing our efforts on what we can do now and collaborating with those who can offer different or complementary solutions, we can kickstart a movement, one based on sound principles, and help each other to find ways of improving the quality of life for a lot of people.
And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about working with Tameem and the others at Ninja Theory is that in addition to the creativity, they do want to root the work in the underlying science. And the Insight Project, I think, is going to be a really exciting way of doing that. Take some very simple principles that go back to the psychologist William James, one of which is that very much of our emotional state is actually made up of the physical component, the feelings that our body is giving us, whether it's racing heart, tightness in the chest, sweaty palms, butterflies in the stomach. All of those come together to give us, if you like, the substrate of emotional experience, whether that's anger, anxiety, euphoria, or whatever. And this makes contact with a growing feeling within the world of clinical neuroscience that if we're to truly understand the person as a whole and emotions like fear and anxiety, we need to acknowledge that the brain doesn't, or the brain or mind doesn't just simply sit there as an autonomous entity. It's actually embodied in the sense that it's set inside the biology of the body and cannot be separated from it. It's also embedded in the world. It's a dynamic system that's working within another very dynamic system. And you can't understand the brain without understanding the world around it. And it's also inactive. That is, the mental processes that we engage in are all about producing physical acts that determine our interaction with the world. And I think these notions actually touch very closely on what video games do and what video games can offer, and what we're trying to capitalize on in the Insight Project. So I made the point that fear and anxiety are fueled by our body, but shaped by our world. We can think about all of the biology that we can measure using current sophisticated gadgetry. And under some circumstances, those experiences might be seen as very pleasurable or exciting or euphoria-inducing, whereas the same experiences, the same racing heart, tight chest, sweaty palms in a different setting might be experienced as a very frightening and disturbing experience. So under other circumstances than a roller coaster, one might have the same experiences, but those would be deeply distressing and negatively valenced. What we're focusing on is fear and anxiety because we think that across the whole gamut of mental illness, and indeed across the gamut of human experience of distress, anxiety seems to be a very common factor. If we look at something like psychosis, where somebody's experiencing voices or visions, those can be perfectly harmless and even pleasurable. But when they're accompanied by anxiety, that's what seems to be the common denominator in mental suffering. And that's what we want to try and explore, examine, and ultimately try and mitigate.
But why video games? Video games give you real-time feedback and play. They teach you how to acquire new skills and become masters. So anyone that plays video games will know just how good you can become at a particular task when it's engaging and fun. And there really is no reason why that set of principles couldn't be applied to other real-world challenges like mental well-being. Another reason for video games is nobody will play a video game like Hellblade and because it's about psychosis. They'll play it because it's got a great story and a challenge and visuals, and it's a fully rounded experience. There's no stigma attached to playing the game. Whereas in ordinary life, anything to do with mental health often attaches itself to a lot of stigma and judgment. So creating an immersive game experience is something we think will bypass that kind of thinking and allow people to engage in a world and a narrative and a set of challenges that doesn't feel like treatment. So I'm going to just show you this very brief video that summarizes our approach so far. And we're currently in a prototype stage. We've been working on this for well over a year, but this is where we're at. So just to break that down a little further, we start with biometric devices. So you don't control this experience with a gamepad. You control it with your own mind and body. So we're using the different biometric sensors for breathing, heart rate, and eye gaze, and we're expanding that list of biometric signals over time. But from those signals, we can create quite an accurate model of how it's affecting your physiology. So we've taken an MRI scan of a human being and tried to model how, when your heart beats, how the flow and reflection of the waves passes through your body. So the more accurate this model is, the more we have a solid base to work from. And then the next stage is to, if we want to understand fear, is to make you afraid in different ways. And I sort of often think of it as the analogous to the saying that the Inuits have many more words for snow than us. And I think that there's all kinds of different fear that are out there, and there's not one type of anxiety. And so we created a dozen VR simulations that scare you in different ways. So you saw the spider one there. There's one about flying, fear of heights, public speaking even. All kinds of different scenarios in VR, which are designed to explicitly elicit a fear response in you. From that, we run these simulations on several people. And we have ethical clearance for full scientific study, so we can gather more and more people to study. But from that, Paul's team of researchers at Cambridge have been looking into the different biometric signals, trying to find patterns or relationships in those signals, or relationships between those different biometric signals that can sort of mark fear. If you like, we're looking for biomarkers of fear. We're trying to identify specific signatures of fear. When we found those biomarkers, it then opens up the possibility to then visualize that back to you in real time. So instead of just visualizing your heart rate and hearing a boom, 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 you can visualize things like the rate of change or the ratio between the first peak and the second peak, if that's significant, and try and give you information that's more relevant to what you're trying to isolate and change. And then the final stage is to do this all in real time in front of you, so that you have this character or this world in front of you that represents your state of mind or your state of anxiety, and then to be able to manipulate that character or their world to change that. And I should point out that it's not just visualization, it's oralization. It's turning these signals into things that you can listen to and hear, and then experimenting on different techniques for then changing the music and the visuals. And by changing the music or the visual experience, you're changing your own physiological response. Beyond there, we're developing a AI-driven virtual avatar. It's one of our specialties at Ninja Theory, super realistic characters that can respond to you and acknowledge you. We're adding voice recognition and speech synthesis so that you can understand you. And the idea is that eventually you have these characters, this avatar, take you on a journey. And that journey can be based on current successful therapeutic techniques that psychologists perhaps use today that are known to be successful. And then we can encode that into a narrative and a story with a character that can guide you through these processes to help give you the tools you need to control your anxiety. And as we're doing this, we're building an online platform so that when we conduct all these tests and experiments, and a researcher anywhere in the world can log in live and see the biometric data of the user and tailor the experiment. Eventually, we'd like this to be an open platform for researchers around the world, all of which, I must add, sticks to strict GDPR and privacy and ethical guidelines. Another big challenge upcoming further down the track is to create a mass or acquire a mass market biometric device that you can wear with you at all times. So it could be a ring, a wristband, and you might be training to control your anxiety in a sophisticated simulation in VR or on an Xbox or PC. You then need to be able to take that into the real world and get that continuous feedback through a wearable device with feedback. And another point here about data and data analytics, the more we can turn the invisible into real tangible data, the more you can then apply optimization strategies and data analytic tools, which often are used in Facebook algorithms and video games to get you to spend money. But we could use those equivalent algorithms to help optimize the success rate of being able to control your anxiety. And equally, it can be used to tailor each experience to an individual to optimize their chances of success.
So from the perspective of a psychiatrist and somebody who's interested in mental distress, I think this is incredibly inspiring and also incredibly gratifying that a group like Ninja Theory are interested in using their talent and technology with this in mind. I think there's a growing sense within the clinical neuroscience community that if we're really to make a difference to mental health, mental well-being, and mental illness, we need to recognize the importance of understanding the mind within the context that it functions, which is both the body and the world, as well as its own psychological or cognitive processes. And so in order to do that, we need to take hold of bodily signals, and we need to take hold of the environment that the person's in. And I would suggest that actually the combination of the creativity of game design and the technological sophistication of that we find within game design companies, we're in a great position to do some really interesting work. And added to that, Ninja Theory's capacity to provide quite astonishing representations of humans within a virtual environment. I think there's some very exciting things that can be done experimentally and clinically over forthcoming years.
Yeah, but I must add also, Paul, there that a project like this can't work without a scientific basis from which we've come up with a lot of these ideas, and the independent verification and the analysis that's going into it with yourself and your team. So that's also exciting for us. Like, we like to do things, we want to do things that are challenging and meaningful, and we have enormous respect for the science and the approach that Paul and his team are taking. So
when Tameem says that they're very keen to back this up with science, those aren't empty words. And in fact, I should say that Ninja Theory have really put their money where their mouth is. They funded a 4-year PhD studentship for me, and we've recently taken on Lucy Daniel Watanabe, who will be carrying out her project over the next 4 years, and will, I hope, in future festivals be able to share the results of her studies.
Yes, and the project is being funded by Microsoft. We're backed by Microsoft, like, we're committed to see this through. It's going to take several years before we get to a commercial project, but along the way, we very much want to collaborate with other researchers and organizations, and probably get to a point where we can start releasing some of these experiments to the public and involving you perhaps in gathering data that will eventually feed back and help others. So do follow us, Insight Project, or follow us on social media. It's Ninja Theory on Twitter, Instagram, what have you. And thank you for listening, watching.
Thank you.